Okay, today we're going to start with lesson 7.4, find percent of a number mentally. We encounter percents in several everyday activities, calculating a tip at a restaurant, finding the sale price of an item, estimating sales tax, etc. While you could just pull out a cell phone to calculate these percents, it is often easy to compute or estimate them mentally. And actually, most of the time, an estimate is usually sufficient. If you think about calculating a tip at a restaurant, you're not likely to leave the exact percentage to the penny. You're probably going to estimate it. So some of these, it's perfectly acceptable just to estimate the amount. So let's see how we would go about computing these mentally. So for example 1, find each percent mentally. Well, for the first one, it says 50% of 46. If I were going to do this mentally, I would mentally think that 50% is the same as 1/2. So what I'm really finding is half of 46. And if we divide 46 by 2, we get that that is 23. Okay, for 1b, this time we want 70% of 110. So I'm not going to change this to a fraction in my head because it doesn't really make it easier to calculate. But I am going to think of it as a decimal, as 0.7. And then we multiply 0.7 times 110. Mentally, we should be able to come up with 77. Okay, we'll do basically the same thing for C and D. For C, we'll think of 10% as 0.1, and 0.1 times 54 is 5.4. And for D, 1% is 0.01. So 0.01 times 219 is 2.19. So some of these percents, it's easier to just change to a decimal and do the calculations that way. For some percents that are easier to think of as fractions and to actually do the calculation with those fractions, it's helpful to convert those that way. Alright, let's look at example 2. Garrett is shopping for a new video game. The original price of the game is $60. The game is 15% off. How much will Garrett save? And this is one of those where you could actually be standing in a store looking at a video game that's $60 and is now 15% off. So we want to be able to do this without having to pull out a phone to calculate the actual price of the game. So the game is 15% off. And in order to do this mentally, I'm thinking that 15% is equal to 10% plus 5%. It's not really that easy to do 15% mentally. However, I can do 10% mentally and I can do 5% mentally. Specifically, once I've computed what 10% is, this 5% is just half of the 10% that I will have just calculated previously. Okay, so let's see what we get. We have 10% of the $60. And again, we're thinking of this 10% as a decimal, as 0.1. So 0.1 times 60 is $6. And then 5%, again, we can remember that this is half of 10%, so it will be half of this amount, and that makes that a little bit easier to deal with. You could very well change this to a decimal, just change that to 0.05, and multiply that times 60 to get 3 as well. Okay, but we want how much he will save, so we need to add those together to get a total of $9. And this is typically how a lot of people calculate that 15% tip in a restaurant as well. You get the 10% just by multiplying by 0.1, which really just moves the decimal place over once to get $6 here. And then half of that to get 5% is $3. So that's actually a really clever way to calculate tip at a restaurant. Okay, so there's a few try-it-yourself problems here. So go ahead and pause the video, work these out on your own, and when you're ready to check your answers, go ahead and hit resume. I know these say to find them mentally, but notice that I did write down at least a little bit of work of what we are doing mentally on each of these. So that sort of work should be shown on these two try it yourself problems. So go ahead and pause the video, work through those problems, make sure you show some sort of work, and then when you're ready, hit play to check your answers. Okay, for these you should have gotten 20, 21, 4.2, and 1.22, and then for 2A, $75. Okay, let's continue to example 3. Now for these, it says to estimate. So we are going to try to find some way to do these mentally, but first we're going to round either the percent or the number or both to something that's easier to compute. So for example, 22% is very close to 20%. And 594 is very close to 600. So to estimate this, I'm going to find 20% of 600. And again, I'm thinking of this percentage as 0.2. So when we multiply 0.2 times 600, should get 120. That's not exact, but it's a very good estimate. Alright, and for B, 1/4% of 1219. Well, I'm going to think of 1/4% as 1/4 times 1% of 1219. And actually, I'm going to round the 1219 down to 1200 as well, because while it is easy to compute 1% of 1219, it's not going to be easy to calculate 1/4 of that. So we're going to round this down to 1200. Alright, so 1% of 1200 is just 12. So what I really want is 1/4 times 12, which of course is 3. Okay, for C, 49% is very close to 50%, and 61 is very close to 60. So then 50% of 60, remember you're thinking half of 60 is 30. And the last one, 155% of 38. 155% will split into 100%, and we'll round this to 40. So that's 100% and 55%. Well, 100% of 40 is pretty easy. It's just 40. 55% of 40, you can think of this as 50% and 5%. So 50% would be half, or 20, and then 5% of 40 would be 2. So this is 22. So don't forget to add those together, we get 62. Okay. And number 4, it says a restaurant bill totals $21.35. You want to leave a 15% tip. What is a reasonable amount for the tip? And like I said earlier, when you're computing tip, most of the time, you're just looking for an estimate. You're not looking for an exact amount. So when you're looking at this bill, it might make it easier to round that down to $20. So what we're really looking for is 15% of $20. Well, we're going to split that into 2 parts. We have 10% of $20 and 5% of $20. And whatever we get for these two, we want to make sure we add them at the end. Well, again, splitting this into 10 and 5 makes it easy because 10% is very easy to compute. 10% of $20 is just $2. And then 5% is just half of that. So $1. When we add those together, it equals $3. So that would be a reasonable amount for the tip on a bill of $21.35 if you were leaving a 15% tip. Okay, there's a few try it yourself problems at the bottom of this page. So again, make sure that you're showing some sort of work for these. Go ahead and pause the video, work through those problems, and when you're ready, hit play to resume. Okay, for these you should have gotten 45, 120, 60, 117, and a reasonable amount here is $7.50. Okay, now you're estimating on 3A, so if your answers are close to these numbers, but maybe you rounded something a little bit differently, that's okay. It just says to estimate. So on the other hand, though, if my estimate is 45 and yours is 63, those are probably a little bit too far apart. So just double check your numbers. They don't have to be exactly the same as the ones that I got, but just double check what you have and make sure it's reasonably close. It shouldn't be off by more than just, a few. Okay, let's continue on to lesson 7.5, using percent equations. So percent equations are going to be used for the same types of problems that we previously used percent proportions for. So a percent equation is an equivalent form of the percent proportion in which the percent is written as a decimal. And the nice thing about this is that the equation looks the same no matter which part you're missing. Everything will always go in the same place. And it's really easy to figure out which parts are which, because the is will always be the equal sign, and of will always mean to multiply. So here we have the part is equal to the percent of the whole, or the percent times the whole. And I will tell you that percent equations will be the preferred method for solving percent problems, not just in this course, but also in future math courses. So if you're thinking that you really, really like percent proportion and you can just fall back on that, it's going to be very important that you can actually write and use percent equations. So make sure that you're solving those problems in this section with the percent equation, not with percent proportion. Okay, so let's start with example 1. It says to find 38% of 22. So we want to know what is 38% of 22. So what we're looking for will equal 38%, and remember the percent is written as a decimal, so that's 0.38 of means to multiply times 22, the whole. Okay. And this time we're not estimating anymore. We actually want an exact answer. So 0.38 times 22 comes out to 8.36. Okay. For number 2, it says 19 is what percent of 25? So we have 19 is, that's the equal sign. What percent? Well, we don't know. We'll just label it X for now. Of 25. Well, we're going to solve this just like a normal equation. So we will go ahead and divide both sides by 25. And we get that X is equal to 0.76. But make sure you double check the question. It asks 19 is what percent of 25. And remember, this is the percent written as a decimal. So what this really is 76%. Okay, let's do one more. Number 3 says 84 is 16% of what number? we're starting off with 84 is. So 84 equals 16%. We want to write that as a decimal, 0.16, of what number? So multiplied by what number? We'll call it x. Okay. And now to solve this for x, we'll divide both sides by 0.16. And we get that x is equal to 525. Okay. There's a few try-it-yourself problems for you to work on at the bottom of this page. Again, make sure that you are setting these up with a percent equation, not with a percent proportion. Make sure that you're showing work. So go ahead and pause the video, work through those problems, and then hit play to resume when you're done. Okay, let's check your answers. So for these, you should have gotten 57.6, 31.5, 12%, 5%, 60, and 98.75. Okay, let's continue with example 4 on the next page. It says Claire wants to buy a cell phone that costs $180. If a 7% sales tax is added, what is the total cost? Well, I'm going to show you two different ways to do this. And you may just have a preference for one or the other, but be aware that either of these ways will work. So method one consists of calculating the tax and then adding it into this $180 because we want to know the total cost. We don't want to know just how much the sales tax is. So if I were to do that this way, the tax that we're looking for is equal to 0.07, since it's 7%, not 70%, so 0.07 times $180. And 0.07 times 180 is $12.60. So then if I want the total cost, I need the $180 for the phone plus the $12.60 sales tax. And that gives me a total of $192.60. Okay. The other method that you can use to solve this is to think of the sales tax as adding on to the original amount, which of course it is. So we're starting with 100% of 180, and we're adding in an extra 7% for sales tax, for a total of 107%. So now we can set up our percent equation to show that the price is equal to 107% of the original amount. So remember, we write this as a decimal, so this is 1.07 times the original amount of the phone, which was $180. Okay. And then we go ahead and multiply these, 1.07 times 180, and we should get the exact same answer we got last time, $192.60. So either method you prefer is fine. Just make sure that you're using an equation and not a proportion to calculate these. Alright, one more example. Number 5 says Mr. Wilkins purchased a DVD player for $97.19 including tax. The DVD player had a sticker price of $89.99. About what percent sales tax did he pay? Well, if you think about our percent equation, we need to have the part, the percent, and the whole, or at least something that represents those. Here we have the whole is $89.99, but we don't know, we're looking for the percent, but we don't know what the part is that represents the sales tax. But we can find it. We know that this price includes tax, this price, $89.99, does not. So let's subtract them to see at least how much he paid in tax. When we subtract those, that gives us a total of $7.20. And again, this is just the amount of sales tax. Well, now we can write a percent equation to find the percent. So the part, which is the tax, $7.20, is equal to the percent, which we don't know, of the whole, which is the original price of $89.99. And once again, to solve this for x, we'll divide both sides by $89.99. And we get x is equal to 720 divided by 89.99. Comes out pretty close to 0.08. So the question asks about what percent sales tax did he pay? It's about 8%. Okay, there are 2 try-it-yourself problems for you to attempt. Make sure again that you are showing work for both of these. So pause the video, work through those 2 problems, and when you're ready to check your answers, hit play to resume. Okay, for the first one, the sale price of the house should have been $217,000. And for the last one, the percent of the state sales tax, or of the sales tax, should be 6%.